So, what is Bystander and what am I doing with the money for this project? Bystander is my superhero setting. It is set in 2035 in Seattle. The first book is here. This is the first book, which I published in 2010, back before, I think it was before Kickstarter. At the very least, I had not heard of Kickstarter yet. I went through several periods of trying to publish it through agents. I got a lot of responses of, it's a nice story, but we're not interested. Responses back. So I eventually self-published. And it is one of the set of projects I have that I most want to see finished. She is one of my favorite characters I have ever written for any game, novel, whatever. She is, there are others that are up in her area, so I can't really say a favorite character, but she is one of my favorites. It's hard to choose between the things you create. There are tons of them. You love them all a lot, and this is one I definitely love very much. In some ways, she's a little bit similar to Jessica Jones for people that, and I know Jessica Jones is a thing, is a popular thing right now with the Netflix shows coming out. In fact, the Netflix shows introduced me to Jessica Jones, and Lucretia as a character I've written might be one of the reasons why I like the Jessica Jones so much. On one hand, I kind of wish I knew about that character beforehand. On the other hand, then Lucretia might have come out differently than she did. So I'm kind of glad I didn't know about her until the Netflix shows came out. And the world setting is one where there are people with abilities. There isn't anybody that goes out in costume and fights crime. You don't have a lot of the vigilante things going on. Lucretia is an exception. Most of the people with abilities are normal. Her day job is a librarian, and that would not be unusual. There would be peaks in as waiters or servers at an empathic server at a high-end restaurant, or a secretary for a law firm, or other things like that. Different people working for the police. A construction worker with wall crawling or super strength or something like that. Those kind of things. The kind of superpowers that the public knows about in the setting are, in general, very mild. And so the vast majority of people in superheroes in the setting have normal lives. I hit that a little bit in the background stuff to make sure, because one of the things that really bugs me about superhero settings like Marvel and DC is, let's ignore the people that trained to get there or submitted themselves to a highly experimental process to make themselves into super soldiers. They asked for it. They are to be valued and respected for their choice of risking their lives. I don't like the idea that people who are born with powers, or people who get them by accident, in comics like Marvel and DC and some of the other lesser known area things, they get pressured by societal issues or other people with powers, and so that they eventually become either a hero or a villain, and they are drawn into life-threatening, combat-centric occupations. I respect the people that choose such occupations. I like a society or a culture that forces a whole class of people who had no choice in what they were, pushing them into such tasks. So I wanted to make sure my setting was one where most of the people with powers had normal lives, or where the dangerous aspect was something of a choice. Now, a lot of danger is thrust on Lucretia's life, but some of it, but she makes the final choice about being the hero. It's a thing. But anyway, what am I doing with the money? And that is kind of going to be a little bit below. I believe I go into that a little bit. Most of it's editing, and I need a professional editor. I want and need a professional editor. I have had the response when I'm talking to people about this before. It's like, why don't you just publish on Kindle, because then you don't need an editor? Technically that's true, because you're responsible for all the processes. When you're doing Kindle or self-publishing like I do, you are responsible for doing all of the product quality control type stuff. And technically I could decide, nah, I don't need an editor, and just throw it out there. And I do write well. I have a relatively high capability for writing well, but that is not the same as not needing an editor. There are lots of people who write very well that dreadfully need editors, and several of the professional authors will tell you, "Oh, I definitely need an editor." You want an editor. I mean, I've gotten by asking help from friends up to now. And a lot of the stuff I did in my 20s as a dumb kid is a little bit could have used. I thought that having pre-reader, a lot more people reading and finding mistakes and having it done through several cycles would fill in, but it takes a long time. Whereas an professional editor is very short, respectively. The editing cycle for Lucretia, for the Bystander here, the first time was about 3 to 4 months and involved about 8 to 10 people. I'm reading the book 3 or 4 times and still was not as highly edited. I still found mistakes afterwards. You don't find your own mistakes until your frame of mind changes significantly from when you wrote it, because the mistakes you make are invisible to you, I've found. So you always want somebody else reading it, but they're not going to find everything either. And the editing cycle for Divine Blood was even longer, because it was a significantly longer book. But yeah, a professional editor will get done much faster and find things much better, and find other things, not just grammar or punctuation. Might find pacing issues that need to be dealt with, or word flow issues, things that you aren't necessarily thinking about, or a pre-reader doesn't necessarily even know about. And I'm not talking about pre-readers as being stupid. I mean, editing is its own profession, and there are things they are aware of that I was not trained for, or that other people who at doctoral level theses were not trained to catch. So most of the cost is going to go to editing, and the cost I've seen quoted is around $2,000, and I'm aiming at a little bit more than that, quite a bit more than that, to cover cover art, formatting, and the idea that possibly more expenses exist, or the editing might be more expensive than I thought. And that's where I stand. That's the product.